In 2009, Dragon Age Origins launched and instantly became one of the greatest RPGs ever made. It had dark storytelling, deep choices, tactical combat, branching decisions, amazing characters. You name it, it had it. Fast forward a decade or so, and the franchise barely resembles what fans fell in love with. So what exactly happened to Dragon Age? Well, we are about to find out. Dragon Age Origins wasn't just another RPG. It felt like a return to something that had been missing for years. Developed by BioWare, this was a game that fully embraced what made classic role-playing games special. It took heavy inspiration from titles like Baldur's Gate, and you could feel that DNA in everything it did. The tone was dark, not just visually, but thematically. This wasn't a power fantasy where you save the world and everyone cheers. This was a world full of political tension, moral ambiguity, and genuinely difficult decisions. There were moments where no matter what you chose, someone suffered. And that's where Origins really stood out because your choices actually mattered. And not in a surface level, mind you, the illusion of choice kinda way, but in a way that you could completely change how the story played out. Characters could live or die based on your decision, and entire storylines could unfold differently depending on how you approach them. Then there was the combat. Unlike what the series would later become, Origins leaned heavily into tactical gameplay. You weren't just button mashing your way through enemies. You had to pause, think, position your party, and actually plan your approach. It felt closer to a strategy game at times, and for a lot of players that was a huge part of the appeal. But what really made the game unforgettable were the companions. Characters like Alistair, Morrigan, and Liliana weren't just party members, they felt like real people. They had their own personalities, their own beliefs, and their own reactions to your choices. And they could like you, disagree with you, or even turn against you depending on how you played. That alone made every playthrough feel personal. And speaking of playthroughs, this game had insane replayability. Different origins, different choices, different outcomes, different builds. You could finish the game and immediately want to start over just to see how things could change. I suppose you could say Dragon Age Origins wasn't just a great RPG. As far as I'm concerned, it was the standard. And not in a million years would you expect to witness what would happen next. Then came 2011, and with that, Dragon Age 2. At first glance, it looked like Dragon Age. The same world, familiar faces, and a story set in the same universe. But the moment you started playing, something felt off. Unlike Origins, which had years behind it, Dragon Age 2 was reportedly developed, or rather crunched roughly, in 14 to 16 months. And you could feel that, not in one specific moment, but everywhere. Let's start with the most obvious thing, which is reused environments. You'd enter the cave, then enter another cave later, and realize it's the same exact layout. The same corridors, the same rooms, just slightly blocked off in different places. Now multiply this by 50 times. And I don't know about you guys, but it made the world feel small. And that was another major shift. Scale. Instead of sprawling, epic journey across multiple regions like we had in Origins, Dragon Age 2 focused almost entirely on a single city, Kirkwall. That's not a bad idea on its own, but combined with the reused environments and limited variety, it made the game feel constrained. I could say that I felt like everything was happening in a loop. The only difference was that you could change night and day cycle, but it was still the same city. And yes, you had the outskirts, but again, same but different, but still the same. Then there was the combat. Origins had this slow, tactical system where every decision mattered. Dragon Age 2, however, went in the totally opposite direction. Faster, flashier, and more action-focused. I remember when I played it for the first time as a warrior. It was so fast-paced and button-mashy, I thought I was playing some sort of a JRPG. Abilities looked bigger, enemies came in waves and spawned literally out of thin air, and the overall pace was much quicker. And let's not forget that we only had 3 specializations per class. I always wanted to play Arcane Warrior in Dragon Age 2, but sadly, that never came to be. Basically, the depth we had in Origins was gone. It started to feel less like a tactical RPG and more like a hack and slash game wearing Dragon Age's skin. The writing also took a hit. Everything felt cheesy, and the main character, Hawk, sounded disinterested. That abomination of a conversation wheel thing didn't help a lot in that department. Either you were mega heroic, sarcastic, or simply an asshole. And that was basically it. The companions were kinda forgettable, but there was still a hint of what made Origin special, particularly in the form of everyone's favorite dwarf, Varric. But that's what makes this moment so important in my opinion, because Dragon Age 2 wasn't where the series fell apart. It was there where the cracks first started to show. Still, hope yet remained. All was not lost. It's true that the franchise took a hit, but it wasn't something you couldn't recover from. Or at least, that's what I thought. And oh boy, was I wrong. In 2014, Dragon Age Inquisition was released, and on paper it looked like a comeback. It reviewed incredibly well, at least when you see the critics' reviews. It even won Game of the Year award. And for many players, it was their first Dragon Age game. But for longtime fans, this was the moment things started to feel completely different. And I would argue the explanation is rather simple. Inquisition didn't build on what came before. It practically changed direction. Instead of the more focused, handcrafted design of earlier games, Inquisition leaned heavily into open-world structure. Suddenly, you weren't moving through tightly designed areas with meaningful choices. You were basically dropped into massive zones filled with things to do. On the surface, that sounded great, but the problem was what you were actually doing there. And one word describes this perfectly: busy work. Go collect shards, go close rifts, go gather resources, and then run back and forth across huge map just to check off objectives. It started to feel less like a classic RPG and more like an MMO, but without the multiplayer component. And that shift didn't just affect exploration, it affected the entire experience. Once again, combat became less tactical, less about planning and positioning, and more about real-time action and ability cooldowns. The depth was still there in some form, but it wasn't the focus anymore. And then there were the maps themselves. They were massive. Visually impressive, sure, but often filled with not much of a real substance. Large stretches of land that looked beautiful, but didn't offer the same level of meaningful interaction or storytelling that earlier games were known for. Devs even said that they learned from Dragon Age 2, but they did the same mistakes again. Plot felt less focused than earlier games. The main villain lacked impact, and there was too much filler content between story missions. From a certain point of view, you could say it was a different kind of design philosophy. Bigger worlds, more content, more hours, but not necessarily better experience. And that's really what defined this stage of Dragon Age. It's also worth mentioning that this is the moment where the series clearly started chasing industry trends, instead of focusing on what made it unique in the first place. And for many fans, me included, that's where Dragon Age lost its identity. After Dragon Age Inquisition, something strange happened. The whole franchise just went quiet. Years passed, with almost no concrete updates, no clear direction, basically just silence. But behind the scenes, however, at BioWare that is, things weren't going well. The first major warning sign came with Mass Effect Andromeda. When it launched in 2017, it was met with heavy criticism. Awkward animations, technical issues, and a general feeling that it lacked the polish and depth people expected from BioWare. It wasn't a complete failure. Some aspects of that game were relatively okay, for example combat, at least in my opinion, but it damaged the studio's reputation in a big way. Then came Anthem. Anthem was supposed to be BioWare's next big thing, a live service, multiplayer-focused game backed by Electronic Arts. But when it released in 2019, it was a colossal disaster. Broken systems, repetitive gameplay, a lack of meaningful content, and worst of all, it felt nothing like the kind of games BioWare was known for. It's safe to say that Anthem shook people's confidence in the studio entirely, and while all of this was happening, the next Dragon Age was stuck in development. Not moving forward, but restarting multiple times. Reports suggested that the game was rebooted more than once, shifting from a traditional single-player RPG to a live service model, and then back again. Every time that happened, progress was lost and direction was reset. And with this instability came another major problem. People started leaving. Key developers who had helped define Dragon Age were no longer there. Writers, directors, longtime veterans, all of them gone. And with them, a lot of the identity that made these games special in the first place. So while fans were waiting for the next Dragon Age, the studio behind was struggling to figure out what it even wanted to be. If this isn't foreshadowing for what's gonna happen next, I don't know what is. Which brings us to today, and to Dragon Age: The Veilguard. After years of silence, restarts, and uncertainty, this is the game that's supposed to define the future of the franchise? I say hell no. I'm not gonna sugarcoat this, let's be real. The game is utter shit. You could see it immediately from the trailer itself, because when I first saw it, it immediately screamed hard pass to me. I mean, just look at it. It doesn't look like Dragon Age at all. It's only a Dragon Age game because they named it so. Without it, you would never associate this turd to Dragon Age. But let's say you were a bit dumb, you were super hyped and optimistic about it, that you actually abandoned common sense and you decided to buy this abortion. This Metacritic quote will tell you everything about it. I cannot help but consider it an insult. It has absolutely nothing of Dragon Age, neither in the writing, nor in the art style, nor in the gameplay, and it is forcibly stuffed with political agenda, which Dragon Age does not need since it has always been extremely inclusive. Watching the Battle of Ostagar from the Dragon Age, and then looking at any cutscene from this is simply painful. If you compare it to Dragon Age Origins, the difference is immediately noticeable. Origins was dark, grounded, and often brutal in its storytelling. The Veilguard, however, is shallow, simplistic, and woke as fuck. Better not misgender someone or you might end up doing a zillion push-ups. Choices you make are meaningless. Combat is action-focused and repetitive as hell, and companions are so fucking annoying you are actively working to get rid of them instead of working together with them. I could go on and on how shitty this game is, but the best thing you can do about Veilguard is to forget it, never play it, and wait for another Dragon Age game. However, considering what the situation in BioWare is, as well as the colossal diarrhea Veilguard turned out to be, I don't think this is gonna happen anytime soon. Now comes the most important question of them all. What is next in store for Dragon Age as a franchise? This is how I see it. Veilguard underperformed in comparison to EA's expectations, because they roughly had around 1.5 million players versus double expected from EA. It seems EA was optimistic as fuck. Well, sucks to be them. Anyway, we all know development was messy, multiple reboots, live service pivots, staff turnover, stuff like that, and post-launch support was basically killed immediately. No DLC planned, no expansions, and no long-term support roadmap. This alone is a huge red flag because Dragon Age games historically always had expansions. Also, this is the part people underestimate. Reports say Veilguard's failure led to layoffs and restructuring at BioWare. EA was already skeptical about investing further, and a proposed Dragon Age Remastered trilogy was rejected. And that last one is brutal because remasters are low-risk money and EA still said no. So pretty much Dragon Age is not dead, not officially anyway, but realistically speaking we could look at this in 3 timeframes. If you look at it short term, which is next 3 to 5 years, there is no new Dragon Age game in development, at least publicly, no DLC for Veilguard, thank fuck for that, and no remasters approved, which basically means the franchise is on thin ice. If you look at this problem medium term, Dragon Age's future now depends almost entirely on how well Mass Effect 5 will perform. If it succeeds, EA might greenlight another Dragon Age project, but if it fails, BioWare itself could be in serious trouble. And finally, when we are talking about long-term possibilities, these are the only realistic paths I can see. Number 1 would be soft reboot, which again, it's most likely. New Dragon Age with completely different direction, and probably less classic RPG and more action-focused. Number 2 is dormancy, the franchise will disappear for a decade, and number 3 is external revival, which means that another studio eventually gets the IP and they make Dragon Age like that. Long story short, don't expect anything and pray that Mass Effect 5 does really good. And given what was happening with BioWare over the last couple of years, I am not optimistic at all. I reckon we'll just have to wait and see what happens. All I know is that the tragedy of Dragon Age isn't that it failed, it's that we've already seen how incredible it could be. And that's just fucking sad. Right, it seems I already talked way too much, so I'm gonna end here. Thanks for watching, and if you like what you heard, like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. That's it from me, until the next one.